The
The
Vethkai do not celebrate
victories. They log them. There's for what it's worth a distinction there,
There's
cold,
for what it's worth
administrative
a
distinction
there,
that says
a cold.
everything about what kind of civilization builds warships the size of
Administrative
moons,
distinction
and
that says
names
everything
their
about what
admirals
kind
after
of
mathematical
civilization
proofs.
builds warships.
When the final colony ship of the Duranic
The
Confederation
size of moons,
folded out of
and
Helix
names their
Sector,
admirals
and
after
the
mathematical
last cannon
proofs.
platform went dark, Grand Marshal
When the final
Sci-Fi
colony ship
didn't
of the
raise a
Duranic
glass
Confederation
or embrace
folded out
a
of
general.
Helix Sector,
She sat at her
and the
command
last
chair, pulled
Grand
up a
Marshal
data tablet,
Savothine
and
didn't raise a
began
glass or
composing the
embrace a general.
post-conflict settlement terms.
She sat in her
The
command
war had
chair.
lasted 19
she pulled up a
of their
data
years.
tablet and began composing the
412 billion
post-conflict
lives,
settlement
Vethkai,
terms.
Duranic, and
The war had lasted 19 of their years.
The bad, luck to sit between the two empires, were now numbers in a casualty
412
ledger.
billion lives.
Sci-Fi and red,
Vethkai,
basically. Those
Duranic.
numbers the way a surgeon reads a chart.
And
Clinical,
a scattering of
necessary,
unfortunate neutrals
which
who
filed.
had.
She was, by any measure, the greatest military mind.
The bad,
in the known
luck
galaxy.
to sit between the
She had
two
also never once
empires
heard of the Vanguard.
were now numbers in a
Neither had anyone
casualty
else,
ledger.
really,
Savothine
and not
read
yet.
basically
The Galactic
those numbers the
Conclaves,
way a
for what it's
surgeon
worth,
reads a chart.
mediation chamber on Thura Station smelled like
Clinical,
recycled air.
necessary,
and
which filed.
Old ambition, which is to say it smelled like every room where empires pretend to negotiate
She
while
was,
actually
by
just
any
deciding
measure, the
how
greatest
losing
military
side gets
mind in
carved
the
up.
known galaxy.
The basically station hung at the gravitational midpoint.
She had also
between
never once
Vethkai
heard of the
and
Vanguard
Duranic
Corps.
space, which meant both parties spent the entire journey
Neither
there
had
feeling
anyone else,
vaguely
really,
displaced,
and
which
not
the
yet.
conclave diplomats believe created a productive psychological
The
level.
Galactic
It did not.
Conclaves, for what
the
it's
Duranic
worth.
delegation, I think, arrived first, which 12
Mediation
figures in
chamber
morning
on Thura
white,
Station
their
smelled like
bioluminescent
recycled
skin
air
dimmed
and
to
old
near gray.
ambition.
Their lead negotiator,
It
a
smelled
senior
like every
cast
room where
elder named
empires pretend to
Orthvos,
negotiate
walked
while
like someone
actually
who'd
just
already been
deciding
told the verdict
how.
and was only here
The
for
losing
paperwork,
side gets
which,
carved
to be
up.
fair, was accurate. The Vethkai arrived in a single
The
shuttle.
station hung at the
3
gravitational
delegates,
midpoint
no
between
honor guard,
Vethkai and
0
Duranic
ceremonial
space.
anything. Savathai and herself
Which meant both
wasn't
parties
present,
spent the entire
and
journey
she had
there
sent her
feeling
junior
vaguely
attaché,
displaced.
a female named Kiri's Tan, because
Which the conclave
settlement was,
diplomats believed
in her
created a
estimation,
productive psychological
a formality
leveling.
requiring no further expenditure
The
of her
Duranic
attention.
delegation
This,
arrived
as it
first. All
turned
12
out, would
figures
be
in
remembered
morning
as
white.
the second most catastrophic miscalculation in
Their
galactic
bioluminescent
history.
skin
The
dimmed
first
to
was
near
what
gray.
happened 26 hours later. Conclave facilitator
Their
Yannick
lead
Sorath,
negotiator,
a
a senior
Thuracene,
cast elder named
bulbous-headed,
Orith Voss,
eight-fingered, with the practiced look of someone who'd personally
walked
overseen
like someone who'd already
47
been told the
interspecies
verdict and was only here
negotiations
for the
without once
paperwork.
spilling coffee on anyone. Called
Which,
the
to be
session
fair,
order
was
at
accurate.
0900 standard. The treaty framework was clean. The Vethkai had won.
The Vethkai
Duranic
arrived in a
seeded
single
2
shuttle,
outer belt
3
systems,
delegates,
paid
no honor
reparations
guard.
in matter-condensed energy cells,
Savothine
and
herself wasn't
agreed
present,
to a
and she had sent her
century-long
junior
arms
attaché,
limitation
a
protocol.
female named
Brutal
Kiri's Tan.
terms, survivable
the settlement
terms.
was,
the
in her
kind both
estimation,
parties could tell their people was not ideal, but not extinction. Kiri's
a
Tan
formality
reviewed the
requiring no
digital
further
terms on her
expenditure of her
display.
attention.
Her secondary eyelids, the filtering
This,
membranes
as
of
it
the
turned
Vethkai
out,
deployed in bright light, or as it turned out, in the presence of deep irritation,
would be remembered
slid
as the
halfway
second
across.
most
She was
catastrophic
satisfied,
miscalculation
almost
in
bored.
galactic
Plus,
history.
Orith Voss had just placed
Conclave
his multi-jointed
facilitator
hand
Yannick
over the
Sorath, a
ratification
Thuracene,
seal when the
bulbous-headed
chamber's
eight-fingered,
proximity alarm went off. Not the station
with the
alarm,
practiced look of
not
someone
a
who'd
distant,
personally
administrative
overseen
ping from traffic control. The chamber alarm, the
47
one that meant
interspecies
something was already
negotiations
inside
without once
the
spilling
perimeter.
coffee on
Yannick
anyone,
Sorath looked
called
up from
the
his
session
tablet. That's,
to order
he
its
started.
0900
The doors
standard.
opened. She walked in the way people walk when they've already done the math on every exit in the
The
room.
treaty framework was clean.
Found it irrelevant. Average height for a human, which meant she stood roughly chest height to the Vethkai
The Vethkai
delegates
had won.
and barely reached Orith Voss's collarbone. She wore a coat the color of
The Duranic
gunmetal
seeded
over
2
what
outer
appeared
belt
to be
systems,
military underarm.
paid
The
reparations in
rank sort of
matter-condensed energy
insignia
cells,
on her collar wasn't any branch
agreed
the
to a
Conclave's
century-long
registry
arms
could immediately
limitation
identify.
protocol.
Behind her, 11 more.
the kind
Same coat,
both parties
same
could tell
walk.
their people
That
was
particular
not
kind of
ideal
stillness
but
that
not
isn't
extinction.
restful. The kind that's the coil
Reviewed the
before
digital
spring.
terms on her
The
display.
honestly,
Her
woman
secondary
stopped at the center of
eyelids,
the room,
the filtering
looked around
membranes,
at the
the
arrayed diplomats with
Vethkai
a mild
deployed in bright
expression of
light,
someone
or,
who'd
as it
arrived at
turned
party,
out,
and found it slightly less interesting than expected.
in the
and
presence
said,
of deep
"Commander
irritation,
Rhea Maris,
slid halfway across.
Vanguard Corps, Terran Forward Command.
Plus,
I'm told there's a
Orith Voss
treaty
had just
being
placed his
signed.
multi-jointed hand
Kiri's
over the
Tan's
ratification
secondary
seal when
eyelids snapped fully closed.
the
then
chamber's
opened.
proximity
This
alarm
is a
went
closed
off.
session. Humans were not invited to these negotiations. No,
The one that
Maris
meant something
tilted her
was
head.
already
You're
inside
right.
the perimeter.
Plus, you didn't invite us. A pause, very brief, loaded like a shell in a chamber. You did send, I think, 17 military engagements into
She walked in the way
Duranic
people
space
walk
across
when they've
3
already done the
sectors of
math
your
on
own
every
charts
exit in the
listed
room
as
and
under Terran observation rights.
average height
Silence.
for a human,
You destroyed
which meant she
honestly
stood roughly
the
chest
listening
height to
post
the
on Crater
Vethkai
Station.
delegates.
16 crew. Another pause.
And
Our
barely
crew.
reached Orth
Orth
Voss's
Voss
collarbone.
went very still. Kiristan Stuth. Humans hold
She
no
wore a
formal
coat the
seat
color of
at this
gunmetal
table.
over what
Your
appeared to be
species
military
declared
underarmor.
observational neutrality in the Conclave Charter.
The
You
rank
forfeited, for what it's worth. We declared observational neutrality. Maris agreed.
insignia
pleasantly.
on her
We
collar
did not
wasn't any
declare
branch the
indifference.
Conclave's
She
registry
reached
could
into her coat.
immediately identify.
Every Vethkai hand in the room moved
Behind
towards
her,
sidearms
11 more.
and placed a data chip on the table. 714
That
documented
particular kind of
violations
stillness
Helix
that isn't
sector
restful.
demarcation
The kind that's the coil
All
before
timestamped.
spring.
All surveilled.
The
All
armored
saved on
commander stopped
47
at the center of the
independent
room,
backup servers located in systems neither of you know about.
looked around
She
at the arrayed
looked at the chip the way a
diplomats
card
with the
player
mild
looks at a
expression
card
of
and
someone
just
who
laid
arrives
face
at
up.
a
The war is over.
Party
I'm not
and
here
found
to
it
restart
slightly
it.
less interesting
She let
than
that
expected,
breathe for
and
exactly
said,
2 seconds.
Commander Ramirez.
I'm here because whatever
Vanguard
piece
Corps
you're
Terran
building,
Forward Command.
it's going to include us, or it's going to require an explanation for why it doesn't. Yannick Sorath,
I'm told
who had
there's a
helped
treaty
with
being
47
signed.
negotiations, who prided himself on having seen everything,
This is a
wrote
closed
3
session.
words in a session log. Humans, the humans. No one present in that chamber
Humans were not
had
invited
ever
to
dealt
these
with the Vanguard
negotiations.
Corps
No.
directly. Most didn't know the designation, which what they knew of humanity
Plus,
was
you didn't
collated
invite
from
us.
2 centuries of observational data. A species about 400 years behind
You did
Vethkai in
send,
drive
I think.
technology, still running on meat and electrochemical nerve signals, prone to what xenopsychologists
17
call
military engagements
disproportionate
into Duranic
emotional
space across
investment
3
in
sectors
outcomes,
that your own
and
charts.
notable primarily for the alarming
Listed
rate
as
at which
under
they
Terran
reproduced
observation
and
rights.
the baffling
Silence.
stubbornness with which they survived things that should have.
You destroyed the
Killed them.
listening
The
post
Conclave's
on Crater
official
Station.
threat matrix for humanity, last updated 9 years prior, rated them
16
as
crew.
Level 2, monitored, non-critical. Notable for
Our
resource
crew.
tenacity and
Orth Voss went
psychological
very still.
unpredictability. Not a strategic factor.
Humans
Well,
hold no
threat
formal
matrix,
seat at this
like
table.
Sevathine's
Your
treaty
species
delegation,
declared
hadn't
observational
anticipated
neutrality in the
Commander Maris.
You forfeited.
Had not
For what it's
anticipated
worth.
what a
We
Vanguard
declared
Corps
observational
asset actually
neutrality.
was. The designation itself was
We did
almost
not
14
declare
years old by
indifference.
then. Born in a classified Terran defense session after the first Vethkataranic skirmish,
towards
pushed
sidearms
debris
and
fields
placed a
into
data
3
chip on
Terran
the table.
observation corridors, and not one member of the Galactic community sent
714
so
documented
much as a
violations of the Helix
notification.
sector demarcation
Forward Command
agreement.
had looked at the math. 2 major empires,
All
one
saved on
grinding
47
war
independent
of
backup
attrition.
servers
A
located in
galaxy
systems
full of
neither of you know
civilizations
about.
either picking
war
sides or
is
hiding,
over.
and humanity sitting in the middle of it all with outdated ships. 17 listening
I'm
stations.
not here to restart
and a
it.
seat at the conclave table that granted them exactly as much authority as a rubber stamp in a room full
I'm
of people
here
who'd
because
already
whatever
decided.
piece you're
The
building,
Vanguard Corps, in my opinion,
it's going to
was
include
the answer
us.
to that math.
Or
Not
it's
an
going
army,
to require
not a
an
fleet,
explanation for
and
why it
something
doesn't.
harder to categorize. And the Terrans,
Who would help
had a
with
gift
47
for uncomfortable
negotiations,
precision,
who
had
prided
understood
himself
from the
on having
beginning that
seen
hard
everything.
to categorize was their greatest strategic asset. Maris
Wrote
had been
3
recruited
words in
at
his session
22,
log.
postdoctoral in xenopolitical systems, with a sealed disciplinary record from her time at the Outer Station Academy that the Vanguard recruiter had read very carefully.
The shield
and
is
then
activating. We have
smiled
to
about.
move.
The
She'd been in
soldiers
the
are
Corps
closing in.
11
What's the plan?
years. She had
This skull is the
participated in
key.
4
Most didn't know the
undisclosed
designation.
operations, overseeing the evacuation of 1 compromised listening station under active weapons fire, and once talked 3 Duranic patrol commanders out of destroying a Terran. Research
About
buoyed
400
by
years
explaining the
behind
buoy's
Vethkai in
acoustic
drive
signature
technology.
in enough technical detail that the commanders concluded it was cheaper to let it exist than to file the paperwork the destruction would require. She was exceptionally good at her job.
The enemy advances.
And
We must act
her
now,
job,
but our
broadly,
forces are
was this:
depleted. Then
go to
we
the
make our
places where
stand
history
here.
was being made without humanity in the room, and make humanity matter anyway. The conclave recess
With
lasted
which they
3
survived
hours.
things that should have
Maris sat
killed
in the
them.
station's observation lounge
conclave's
with a coffee
official
she'd
threat.
brought herself. The station's catering hadn't thing a human digestive system would thank them for, and watched the curve of local space through the transparent aluminum and waited. For seconds, Lieutenant Declan Osei
The
sat
schematics
across
are
from her,
confirmed. We move on your
reviewing
signal.
something on his wrist
Agreed.
display.
Check the data
He was
chip.
28,
It's active.
from
All
the
green.
Atlantic coastal region of West
Team
Africa.
advance. Weapons hot.
Quiet in the way
Copy that.
meant
Moving
he was
out.
always thinking about 17 things at once. They're going to say no, he said, not looking up. They're going to try. Maris turned her coffee cup in her hand.
The designation
Kiri,
itself
Stan
was
looked like she
almost
wanted to have
14
you
years
arrested.
old by then.
She did the calculation
Born in
on
a
what that would
classified
cost.
Terran defense
Came up negative. A small shrug. They're good at math. What about the Duranic Elder? Maris considered. He was relieved.
Observation corridors,
Osei looked up
and
at
not
that.
one member
They're the
of
ones
the
who got
Galactic
carved
community
up,
sent
she
so
said.
much as a
They've been sitting
notification.
across from Vethkai's supremacy
Forward Command
for
had
19
looked at the
years.
math.
Now there's a third variable in the room, and it's one nobody budgeted
Two major
for.
empires.
She drank her coffee.
One grinding
Orth
war of
Voss, for what it's
attrition.
worth, is intelligent, and he's already run the numbers on what that means. Osei was quiet for a moment. Then, and if Sevathian decides to deploy
You
the threshold
trespass
fleet
here,
rather
human.
than
I
renegotiate,
stand my ground. Then
Maris
face
set her
our
cup
wrath.
down. Outside, the dark was enormous and indifferent, and full of things humanity hadn't yet mapped. Then,
Team, the
she
objective
said
is ahead.
she
Stay
meets
sharp and
the
follow my
Vanguard.
lead. Copy
It
that
wasn't
lead.
a threat.
Move out.
It wasn't bravado. It
The
was, to be
Vanguard
fair,
Corps,
the
in my
tone of someone
opinion,
who's already thought
was
through
the answer
every
to that
scenario.
math.
The way a doctor says then, we operate.
Not a fleet.
Not because they
And
want
something
it,
harder to
but
categorize.
because the alternative
And the
isn't
Terrans,
acceptable, and they've already made their peace with what the surgery
who had a
costs.
gift for
Osei
uncomfortable
watched her
precision.
face. He had been with her for 4 years. Had seen her in
He had
3
understood
active
from the
hostile
beginning that
environments.
hard to
He still
categorize
couldn't
was
fully
their greatest
read her,
strategic
and
asset.
which he had come to understand was entirely intentional. The session reconvened at 1400 Standard, which Kiri's Tan placed both hands flat on the table. A Vethkai gesture that meant, roughly, I'm about to say something I find deeply
Recruiter had read
distasteful,
very carefully and then
I
smiled
require
about.
acknowledgement of that before I proceed. The Vethkai governance
She'd been in the
acknowledges
Corps
that
11
Terran Forward
years.
Command has documented evidence of sector violations. The words came out like furniture being
She had
moved.
participated in
Carefully,
4
with
undisclosed
effort,
operations.
and we propose a supplementary clause. Terran observation rights formally recognized within the established Helix corridor, with conclave-mediated review of the violation. Yenixorth's 8 fingers typed very fast. Orth Voss's bioluminescence
The buoy's acoustic
flickered,
signature is a
the
complex
Duranic
waveform,
equivalent
encoding
of a
environmental
sharp
data through
exhale.
frequency modulation
Maris
and
looked
phase
at the
shifts.
chip, still
Commanders
sitting on the table.
concluded it was cheaper to
That's a
let it
start.
exist than to
Basically,
file
she
the
said.
paperwork
And
to
it was-
destruction.
The Vanguard Corps had spent
Command, this
11
is Alpha.
years
Position
preparing
secured,
for moments
advancing to
like this.
objective.
Thankless,
Roger that. Proceeding with
invisible,
caution.
granular
Go to the
moments where the
places where
sentence
history
spoken
was
in a
being
room
made without
shaped the next
humanity in
30
the
years
room.
of species survival margin. No one would write a song about
Team,
this.
advance and
No
secure the
historian
ridge.
would call
Hostiles
it a
may be
battle.
near.
But it
Copy
was
lead.
won.
Moving to cover.
The kind
Stay
humanity
frosty. Eyes
had
open.
always been
The
quietly,
conclave recess
stubbornly
lasted
best
3
at.
hours.
The kind that didn't show up on threat matrices. Not yet. Plus, Sevathian received the session report 14 hours after Maris walked into the chamber.
Catering hadn't
She read
thing
it
a human
twice, which
digestive
a
system
habit.
would thank
She
them
never made
for,
a conclusion
and
in a
watched the
single
curve
read.
of local
The first pass was for data. The
space
second
through the
was
transparent
for the
aluminum
thing
and
underneath
waited.
the data, the structural shape
Her
of
second,
what was
Lieutenant
really being
Declan Osei,
communicated.
sat across
She
from
read a
her,
third time.
reviewing something on his
Then
wrist display.
she called her senior strategic analyst, a
The anomaly is
six-limbed
growing. We must act
academic
now.
named
The scans
VS,
confirm
though,
it. Shields are critical.
and
Deploy
asked him to
countermeasures. We
pull
can't afford
everything
delays.
the
Agreed,
government held on
initiating
the Terran
quiet in
Vanguard
the way
Corps.
that meant he was
The answer
always
came
thinking about
TBH
17
back in
things at
40
once.
minutes, 23 pages. Mostly field notes,
As they're going
3
to say
satellite
no.
observations, 1 intercepted internal Terran communication from 8 years
They're
ago
going
that
to
referenced the
try.
Corps obliquely,
Maris turned her coffee
and a
cup in her
biological
hands.
threat assessment that had been written, VS though admitted with some discomfort, by someone whose primary expertise was epidemiology rather than military science.
Came
Why,
up
you know,
negative.
was this assigned to an epidemiologist?
What about the Duranic Elder?
Sevathian
Maris,
asked.
they're good at math.
A pause. The Corps' initial kind of identification was flagged under the Xenobiological Observation Protocol.
We move now.
The
No
original
delays.
analyst
Gear up.
categorized
We
them
breach in
as
5.
a behavioral
Copy.
anomaly
Stay
rather
sharp.
than a strategic
We have to
unit.
override the protocols.
Sevathian set
now.
the report
too
down.
risky. We could lose
A
everything.
behavioral
If we don't,
anomaly.
the mission
She had
fails.
spent
Do it.
19 years dismantling a galactic empire. A real
Copy
one.
that. Readings
with
are census
dreadnoughts
stable.
and fortified sectors.
The situation
and
is
admirals
worse
who've
than we
been
thought.
waging war
How
since
bad
before
is
her
it?
commission.
Bad enough that we
She
need
had
to act
done it
now.
with precision.
What do we do?
With patience,
And he's already run
with
the
cold
numbers on what
application
that means.
of overwhelming force.
Osei
and
was quiet
calculated
for a
impulse.
moment.
And humanity had walked
And if
into her
Savathi decides
ceasefire
to
with
deploy the
11
threshold
people
fleet rather
and
than
a data
renegotiate?
chip. Give me everything on their commander, she said. Maris did not know she was being profiled. She also, in my opinion, wouldn't have changed anything
Then
if she had.
she said
She
she
was too
meets
busy.
the
In
Vanguard.
the 48 hours following the supplementary clause agreement, the Vanguard
Anomaly
team
is
worked
evolving.
in shifts
We need to
that
move.
made Osei's
Agreed. But the
eyes
defenses
look
are too
permanently
strong. Then we
glassed
flank
over.
them. You
The
take the
clause was a
left.
foot in the door.
Captain,
That
anomaly
was all.
confirmed. Hostile
A foot in the
signatures.
door
Copy. Moving to
meant
engage.
nothing if you didn't then
There,
do something
the
with
main
the door.
structure.
And
But because the
what Maris
alternative
needed the
isn't
door to open
acceptable, and they've
onto
already
was
made
a
their
formal
peace with
Terran
what the
observer seat at the post-conflict restructuring talks. Belmano, binding, clause-backed. The restructuring talks would determine trade corridors,
The scans
systems
confirm it.
sovereignty
We must
borders,
act now.
and
I
the
agree.
legal
What are our
framework
options?
that
The
would
strike
govern
team
the
is
Helix
preparing.
sector
Understood.
for the
I'll
next
coordinate.
generation.
The data
If
is
Terran
conclusive.
systems
This
were
anomaly
adjacent
is our
those
chance to
corridors
leave.
It's risky. Are
and
the models
humanity
verified?
had
They
no
are.
seat
We
at the
must act
table.
now.
They'd spend the next
He
40
still
years watching the
couldn't fully
galaxy
read
build
her.
highways through their backyard and then charge them tolls. So,
Contact
the door.
ahead. Possible
Corpsman
ambush.
First
Copy.
Class
Weapons
Anya
hot.
Christian,
Advancing. Stay sharp.
25, former xenolinguist,
Kira's
with a
Tan
memory
placed
for
both
detail
hands
that made
flat on the
computers
table,
slightly
a
nervous.
Vethkai gesture
Had
that
spent
meant
36 hours mapping every
I'm
Duranic
about to say
delegate's
something that
stated
I'm
priority
deeply
against their
distasteful,
known
and I
economic
require
pressures
acknowledgement of
and
that.
producing a compatibility matrix. Orith Voss, the matrix suggested, had two things he needed from this settlement that the Vethkai
Documented
terms did
evidence of
not
sector
adequately
violations.
address. Internal infrastructure rights for 3 core war Duranic systems, and
With effort, and
a
we
language
propose a
clause that
supplementary
protected
clause.
Duranic cultural designations in a newly restructured
We
Helix
must proceed
registry.
with the plan. The
These are
risks
not the
are high, but
largest
the alternative
issues
is
on the
unacceptable.
table.
I
They were the
understand
ones
the
that made
consequences are
Orith
clear.
Voss's bioluminescence flicker most when he thought no one was watching. Christian flag, pretty much, them to Maris at
Orith Voss's
0, 300
bioluminescence
station
flickered,
time.
the Duranic
Maris read the
equivalent of a
matrix
sharp
with one
exhale.
hand and ate a cold ration bar with the
Looked
other.
at the chip
The
still
infrastructure
sitting on
rights
the
were
table
never going to
between them.
survive Vethkai review as a standalone demand.
The anomaly
she
is
said.
escalating.
No,
Containment protocols
which,
are
but
failing.
if they're bundled
Understood.
into
What are
the
your
sector
orders?
navigation
We need to initiate
framework as a
lockdown
technical
immediately.
provision rather than a sovereignty claim, the Vethkai legal team processes it as logistics, not politics. And Orith Voss gets what he needs without having to ask for it. Christian paused. He'd know we did it.
No historian
Yes.
would call it a
He'd
battle.
owe us. He'd remember us, Maris said, which wasn't the same thing, and they
The
both
kind
knew
humanity
it.
had
It's got
always been
paid
quietly,
and forgotten.
stubbornly Bethesda.
Look, being remembered was structural.
The kind
Plus,
that didn't show up on
TBH,
threat
the
matrices.
session on day 3 was different. Something had shifted. The Duranic
Plus,
delegates sat
Sivothene
slightly
received the
differently.
session report
Their
14
postures
hours
less
after Maris
collapsed,
walked into the chamber.
Their bioluminescence running
She
warm.
read it twice,
Orith Voss looked
which
at
a habit
Maris once,
she never made a
briefly,
conclusion
when
on
the
a single
infrastructure
read.
provision was introduced.
The projections
as a
are clear.
technical
This venture will
His face
transform
did
the
nothing.
market.
But what about the
But
regulatory
the light
challenges?
in his
We've
skin
planned for that. The timing
ran
is
gold
perfect.
for exactly 2 seconds. Kiri's Tan noticed her secondary eyelid did the slow slide. She looked at TBH, the provision, then at Maris, then back at the provision with the expression of someone
read it a third
recalculating
time.
some they thought they'd already solved. At the well, 1600 recess, she walked
Then
directly
she called her
to
senior
where
strategic
Maris was
analyst,
standing
a
with her
six-limed
terrible
academic
station
named Vest
coffee.
Ho.
That provision benefits the Duranic, Kiri's Tan said. Not an accusation, an observation delivered with the precision of a scalpel. It benefits the stability of the sector, Maris replied, which I guess benefits everyone with systems in it, including, in my opinion, yours. You are building relationships. I'm attending a
Unintercepted
negotiation.
internal Terran
Kiri's
communication from
Tan's
8 years ago
secondary
referenced the
eyelids
core.
clicked.
The core.
We have a
are you
word in
certain?
Vethkai for what you were
Bleakly,
doing, Commander.
and a
It
biological
translates
threat assessment that had been
approximately
written.
to threading, moving through the gaps in a structure to alter its shape from the inside without applying direct force. Maris considered that. That's a good word,
By
she
someone whose
said.
primary
It isn't a
expertise was
compliment in our
epidemiology
language.
rather than
I
military
know,
science.
a beat. In mine, it's called
The
diplomacy.
latest projections are in.
What
They're
the
exceeding
Vethkai Strategic
expectations.
Division
That's excellent
sent
news.
to Scififi
Indeed.
3
Now we
days
focus on phase
later
2.
wasn't the
Corps'
profile
initial
she'd
kind
requested.
of.
It was technically a profile. It contained Maris's name, her approximate
Identification was
age,
flagged under
her
the
confirmed corp
Xenobiological
affiliation,
Observation Protocol.
and a physical description assembled from available
Marshall,
imaging.
the original
But
analyst,
the bulk of the
categorized them as a
document was
behavioral
something
anomaly
else.
rather than a
Something the
strategic.
analyst had apparently been unable to stop herself from writing
Sivathine
once she
set the
started.
report down.
It was a behavioral analysis of the Vanguard Corps as a unit, not as a military asset, as a system. The analyst, a junior named Ithkov, had enticed something in the session logs that the senior staff had missed, because the senior staff had been looking at the humans the way you look at a piece of furniture
She
that
had
has
done it with
unexpectedly
precision,
moved,
with patience.
with irritation and a desire to replace it. Ithkov
The projections
had
are
looked
clear.
at them
This is
with
our
curiosity.
opportunity.
The risks
What she
are high.
found
Are we
was
prepared?
this.
We are.
The Vanguard
This will
Corps
change
did
everything.
not operate like any military unit in the Conclave Registry. They had no formal chain of combat command beyond the immediate field structure. They shared information laterally. Each member was cross-trained in at least
Maris did
4
not know she was being
specializations,
profiled.
none of them purely martial. They made decisions collaboratively at speed.
We need to move
and
now. The
they
board
deployed
expects results by morning.
resources,
Understood. What's the
social,
plan?
We accelerate the
informational,
timeline and
relational,
eliminate any
with
variables.
an efficiency that Ithkov's analysis compared
She was
with
too
some
busy.
embarrassment to a distributed neural network. The closest analog in Vethkai military doctrine was a unit type that had been theorized 50 years prior and discarded as operationally implausible. The reason it had been discarded, requires individuals
act on this now
capable of
before the
sustained
opportunity
adaptive
closes.
trust
I agree.
under
What's our next
pressure.
move?
We
The
finalize the
Vethkai
agreement and deploy
behavioral
resources
modeling
immediately.
had concluded that no species produced individuals reliably capable of this. It created too
Needed
much
the door to
cognitive
open
load.
onto
The
was a
variables
formal
were too
Terran
inconsistent.
observer seat at the
And-
post-conflict
and
restructuring.
Yet, Ithkov's conclusion
The
was
restructuring
3
talks would
lines,
determine trade
separated
corridors,
from the rest of the
system
report by
sovereignty
space
borders.
that felt almost sheepish. The Vanguard core is built on a structural assumption that appears unique to human psychology.
If Terran
that
systems
individuals
were
can
adjacent to those
simultaneously hold
corridors and
competing
humanity had
certainties
no seat
about
at the
danger,
table,
about each other,
They'd spend
about
the next
outcome,
40
and
years
function
watching the galaxy
effectively
build
within that
highways through their
contradiction.
backyard
Vethkai
and
doctrine models this as
then charge them
instability.
tolls.
The humans appear to have weaponized it. I recommend recategorization from level 2.
Corpsman First Class
non-critical
Ananya
to level
Krishnan,
1.
25,
Strategic
former
assessment
xenolinguist,
required. I also
with
recommend
a memory
we
for
learn their
detail
word
that
for
made
threading.
computers slightly
Sci-Fi
nervous,
read it for what it's worth.
had spent 36
Once,
hours
she did
mapping.
not
the
read it a
simulations
second
show a
time.
high success
She
rate.
sent it to her
But there's
full
still a
senior
risk.
counsel
A risk we
instead,
have to take.
with a single
I agree.
attached note. Where did these people come from? And why do we not know? And the answer assembled over the next 6 hours from diplomatic archives and conclave historical records wasn't comfortable. Humanity had been present in the conclave framework for 2 centuries. They had attended sessions, filed observational reports,
And a language
occasionally
clause
raised
that protected
procedural
Durranic
objections that
cultural
were
designations
overruled
in the
or
newly
simply talked
restructured
over. They were
Helix
honestly
Registry.
small,
These were not the
young,
largest
and
issues
far
on
from
the
the main
table.
theaters of galactic consequence. Sevathine's predecessor had
Contact!
described
Moving
them
to engage!
in a private session
Suppressing
that
fire!
was now embarrassingly
Target
part
down,
of the
pushing
archive.
forward!
A species with potential they'll likely not survive long enough to realize. Humanity had been present for 2
Maris
centuries.
read the Matrix with
Listening,
one hand
learning
and ate a
every
cold
system,
ration bar with the
actually, every tap in a point, every
The
gap
infrastructure
in
rights
every
were never
structure.
going to
Building
survive
something that
Vethkai
didn't look like
review as a
power because it
standalone
didn't look like
demand.
anything anyone had
No,
thought
which
to
but if
watch
they're
for.
bundled into the
The
sector
Vanguard
navigation
Corps
framework
had
as a
11
technical
people
provision,
in the Thura Station negotiation room. But
rather than
there
a sovereignty
were,
claim.
vs those emergency
The Vethkai
assessment
legal team
confirmed,
processes it as
47
logistics.
independent backup servers and systems.
This proposal
neither
gives us
Vethkai
the strategic
nor
edge we
Durranic had
need.
mapped.
What about the risks?
And
We've
that was
mitigated
just
them.
the data
The projections
storage.
are solid.
Sevathian
He'd
sat
know
in
we
her
did
command
it.
chair,
Yes.
which had
He'd owe
survived
us.
19
He'd
years of
remember
war
us.
without ever making her feel what she felt right now.
Which wasn't the same
a
thing,
sensation or
and they
species
both
called
knew it.
freshen, a term with no clean translation. That meant something like, the moment you realize the space is different than the map. She had won the war. She hadn't
But
been
being
paying
remembered was
attention to the
structural.
right thing.
Plus, TBH,
The
the
threshold
session on
fleet
day 3 was different.
Sevathian's instrument of final persuasion, a reserve force she hadn't deployed in the actual war because she hadn't needed to. Look, 7 capital ships, enough firepower to renegotiate the terms of the solar system. She hadn't
Worth
ordered
Voss
its
looked at Maris
mobilization,
once,
but
briefly.
she honestly had thought about it, and the Vanguard Corps had apparently decided to
When
take
the
that thought
infrastructure
seriously.
provision was
On the
introduced
morning
as
of
a
day
technical
4,
amendment.
Maris received a transmission. She read it without expression, set it face down on the table, and sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Osei across
Kiristan
from her
noticed.
waited.
Her secondary
Sevathian's
eyelids did the
people
slow
reached out,
slide.
Maris said, and to negotiate,
She looked at the provision,
to suggest that
then
the
at
Terran
Maris.
Observer proposal might have overstepped conclave framework boundaries.
The projections are
and
clear. We must
that the
act
governance
now.
would find it
What are
appropriate for
options?
us to
We
withdraw
innovate,
the
push
formal
boundaries
request
like always.
pending a 60-day review period. Osei was quiet, during like which, Maris continued, the restructuring talks would conclude and the framework will be legally sealed. More quiet. They want us gone before the door closes, he said. Yes. What are you going to do? Maris picked up the transmission, folded it with a
observation
precision
delivered
that
with the
suggested
precision
she
of a
was doing
scowl.
it to give her hand something to do, and put it in her coat pocket. I'm going to respond, she said, which in say. She looked at the door of the conference room. Outside,
Which I guess
four of her team were
benefits
working.
everyone with
Krishnan
systems
was
in it.
cross-referencing conclave legal precedent. Corpsman Adebayo was building
Including,
the
in my
formal
opinion,
observer petition with citations going back 60 years. 2 others were in
Yours.
separate
You are building
conversations with
relationships.
Durranic
I'm attending
and
a negotiation.
conclave staff, building the kind of small, durable social architecture that didn't show up on any threat matrix, but held more weight than a
to
contract.
threading, moving
11
through the
people.
gaps in a
No
structure
fleet.
to alter
No
its
that
shape
notes.
from the inside
Plus,
without.
just this. I'm going to tell
Applying
them,
direct
Maris
force.
said,
Maris
that we
considered
appreciate the
that.
governance's concern for conclave procedural integrity.
That's a
Osei
good
waited,
word.
and that our petition was filed under Article 7, Clause 14 of the Conclave
It isn't a
Observer
compliment in our
Framework,
language.
which doesn't require
know.
governance approval, only conclave facilitation acknowledgement, which Yennik Soreth already provided in writing at 0900 on day 1. She stood, And then I'm going to go finish the thing. The thing is, there's a moment in every
Profile
negotiation,
sheet requested.
every real one, not the ceremonial kind, where the outcome tilts, where the balance of who needs what from
It
whom
was
shifts
technically a
by
profile.
some fraction of a degree, and everyone in the room feels it.
It contained
Even if no
Maris's
one
name,
says
her
anything,
approximate
because the body
age,
knows
her
before the
confirmed
brain
corp
does.
affiliation,
It happened at
and a
1730
physical
on day
description
4.
assembled from available
Orthvoss
imaging.
signed the amended
Okay, I
framework.
am Chief
Infrastructure
175C.
provisions included
To stop
and
herself
his
from writing once she
bioluminescence
started.
ran gold and held his hand in shake. He looked across the table not at Kiri's tan, but at Maris. He said, in the formal register of Duranic High language,
Not as a
something
military
that Krishnan
asset,
translated
as a system.
quietly in Maris's earpiece. The debt I hold
The
isn't to the
analyst, a
institution,
junior named
but to the one who
Ithkov, had noticed
understood
something
the
in the
shape
session
of what was
logs that
needed.
the senior,
Kiri's tan signed without
because
looking
the
up.
senior staff had
Xorth
been looking
signed.
at the humans
Maris
the way
signed.
you look at a
The
piece
Terran
of
observer
furniture.
seat, permanent, binding, claws
That is
back,
unexpected
was
moved.
formally ratified at
With irritation and a
1748
desire
standard.
to replace it.
Xorth looked across the table at her afterward, his 8 fingers wrapped around a glass of thuracine ceremonial water that tasted.
The
humans
Vanguard
had
Corps
always
did not operate
maintained,
like any military
recycled
unit in the
regret.
Conclave Registry.
You kind of know, he said. In
They had no
47
formal chain of
negotiations,
combat
I've never had a
command
party
beyond the
arrive
immediate
uninvited
field structure.
and leave with more than they came for. Maris picked up her data chip from the table. Pocketed it, that, she said, is probably why it kept working. Outside, somewhere in the dark, 47 servers hummed. And
Relational,
Sebastian,
with an
reading
efficiency that
Ithkov's
Ithkov's
3
analysis
lines for the
compared
5th time,
with some
began to
embarrassment.
understand that the war she'd been fighting wasn't the war humanity had been
To
preparing
a distributed neural
Sebastian
network.
requested the meeting herself. This was in
The closest
Vethkai
analog in
culture,
Vethkai
the
military
equivalent of a
doctrine
mountain
was a
requesting
unit
permission
type
to
that had been
move.
theorized
She did not
50
request things. She
years
directed
prior
them.
and
She
discarded
summoned,
as operationally
authorized,
implausible.
convened. In 19 years of command,
The look,
she hadn't
reason it
once
had been
initiated
discarded.
a meeting with anyone whose rank fell below her own. Maris's rank, by conclave
requires individuals
classification,
capable
was
of sustained
equivalent to a
adaptive
mid-tier
trust under
field
pressure.
officer with no sovereign command designation. Sebastian sent the request anyway. The message was brief, formal, stripped of the usual layers of Vethkai protocol that typically wrap communication like ceremonial bandaging.
The
It
variables
read,
were too
I would
inconsistent.
speak with
and
Commander
yet
Maris before the Terran delegation departs. Location and time at her discretion. Osei read it over Maris's shoulder. Ah, he said. Yes. That's yes. He thought about it. Is it a kind of trap? Maris read the message again. No.
The
How do you know?
Vanguard Corps is
Because if
built
she
on a
wanted to make this
structural
difficult,
assumption
she'd have done it 3 days ago when we were still in the framework.
that appears
She set the
unique to
display
human
down.
psychology.
She's curious. Dangerously, curious? The most interesting kind. They met in a small observation room on the station's upper rim. Neutral ground, no recording protocols. The kind of space that existed on stations like Thuris, specifically for conversations that needed to happen between
A council
the
is
official
assembled.
ones.
We
The
must
pretty
act.
much
The path ahead
room
is
had 2
perilous, but we
chairs
will prevail.
and a view of a particular cluster of stars that meant nothing to either party, but looked in the way certain arrangements of light
I
always
recommend
do, like something
recategorization from
significant.
level 2,
Sebastian
non-critical,
was
to
taller
level
than
1,
Maris
strategic
by nearly
assessment.
a full head.
I
Angular
also
in a
recommend
way
we
all
learn their
Vethkai
word for
were,
threading.
with 4 eyes set. In a horizontal look, band across her face,
Sevathine read it
and
for what it's
the
worth.
particular
Once,
quality of
she
attention
did not
those
read it a
eyes
second time.
conveyed. Total,
She
unblinking,
sent it to her full
recording
senior
everything.
counsel instead.
She had been described in Terran intelligence files as a tactical computer that walks and occasionally blinks. This was, Maris had always felt, an underestimation in the wrong direction. She wasn't a computer. She was someone who had built her mind into a precise instrument and then spent her life using it. There was something in the wear of that,
They had attended
visible
sessions.
if you knew what to look for, that was more human than the description suggested. They
Occasionally
sat.
raised
Neither of them
procedural
opened with
objections that were
pleasantries,
overruled or
and
simply talked
this was
over.
in its way a mutual acknowledgement. Sebastian spoke first, which my analyst believes the Vanguard Corps should be reclassified as a level 1 strategic concern. Your analyst is correct, Maris said. A beat. The closest
in a private
Sebastian
session that
ever
was now
got to
embarrassingly
surprise.
part of the
You
archive.
confirm it without hesitation. Pretending otherwise would be insulting.
Threat
to
level is
both of
escalating.
us.
I'm initiating full
Another beat.
tactical response.
Then,
All
something
units
that might
prepare
have
for
been the
immediate
ghost of
engagement.
appreciation in the set of the Marshal's features. How many are you? Maris looked at her steadily. Enough. Enough for what?
The
For
time
whatever the
has
situation requires.
Witness the
Sebastian leaned
power.
back. A small movement.
Building
but
something
on her
that didn't
frame it
look like
read
power
as a
because it didn't
significant
look like
recalibration
anything
of
anyone
posture.
had.
We have watched humanity
Exactly.
for
Lot to
200
watch
years.
for.
You sat in conclave sessions and filed reports. raised
The
objections
Vanguard
that
Corps
went
had
nowhere.
11 people
She
in the
paused.
Thuris Station
We believe
negotiation
you
room.
understood your position. We understood it perfectly, Maris said. That's why we built something that didn't need your permission to be effective. The Marshal was quiet for a moment. Outside, the star cluster burned without comment. The 47 servers, she said.
which
They're
had
not
survived
merely
19
storage.
years of
No,
war without ever
intelligence
making her feel
infrastructure.
what she felt
Partially.
right now.
What is the
A
other part?
sensation her
Maris
species
considered how
called
much to
threshin,
say.
a
This was the
term with no
calculation she
clean
made
translation.
in every room she'd ever sat in.
Move!
Not
They're
can I trust
closing
this
in!
person, but what does trust
Up the
cost
ridge,
here?
go!
And what does withholding cost? And which cost builds something
She
better?
had won the
It was the
war!
calculation that most species never made explicitly. Most species
She hadn't been
treated
paying
trust
attention
as
to the right
binary.
thing.
On or off, given or withheld. Humanity had learned
The Threshold
hard
Fleet was
and
Sevothine's
slow
instrument of
and
final persuasion,
expensive way
a reserve
that
force she
trust was a
hadn't.
material. Like metal. You worked it. You tested it. You used it to build. The other part, she said, is a network of relationships.
Enough firepower to
Contacts in
renegotiate
37
the
systems
terms of a
across
solar system.
4 sovereign territories. People who have been helped, or heard, or remembered, who know for what it's worth, Vanguard contact frequency, and what it means to use it. Sevothine's horizontal eyes tracked her. You build an intelligence
morning of
network
day 4,
inside sovereign
Maris
territory
received a
without
transmission.
authorization. We build connections, Maris said. What they become depends on what's needed. That is an extremely fine distinction. It's the only kind that matters.
And sat very still for
Sevathine
approximately
was quiet
4
for longer
seconds.
than she usually allowed herself to be. She actually was, Maris could see, doing what the Marshal always did, running it. The full scenario tree, all the branches,
Sensors indicate
every
hostiles
implication
ahead.
of every
Copy that.
variable.
Moving out.
The sort of
Stay
difference
sharp.
was
Watch
that this
for
time,
ambushes.
the
Affirmative.
tree was
To
growing into
negotiate,
territory her models
to suggest
had
that the
mapped.
Terran Observer
19 years,
proposal might have
she had
overstepped
fought an
conclave,
empire. She had won.
and that the governance would
And
find it
the whole
appropriate
time,
for us
in
to
the spaces
withdraw the
between
formal
battles,
request
in the
pending a
unmonitored corridors of the Galactic
60-day
framework,
review
in
period.
session rooms,
Osei
and
was
contact
quiet.
frequencies, and the small acts of understanding that don't register on any sensor array. The humans have been doing this. Actually, not building a fleet, building
The
reach.
restructuring
You were
talks
never
would
watching
conclude
a
and the
war,
framework would be
Sevathine
legally sealed.
said slowly. You were watching, look, what would come after it. Maris said nothing. Which look was its own kind of answer, which the settlement terms, the Marshal continued, the sector framework, the observer seat. You didn't come here to contest the outcome of the war. You came here.
Folded it with a precision that suggested she was doing it to give her hands something to do.